Orbital Operations, a Space Janitor Prequel. Written by Julia Huney. Narrated by Rachel Music. 1. With the huge crowd packed into the Level 82 concourse, Agent Tiberius O'Neill feared the station would explode, or run out of air. He knew it was ridiculous, but the idea of this many people crammed into a paper-thin tin can in the sky almost made him hyperventilate. "Looking a little pale, Grizz." Agent Vanti Fioravanti glanced around the room. She looked casual, but O'Neill knew she was evaluating and cataloging every person and exit on the level. Vanti could spot a troublemaker a kilometer away, and her ability to analyze a situation had been legendary in their academy class. "I'm okay," O'Neill lied. "I just haven't gotten my space legs yet." Vanti's lips twitched. "That's right. You've never spent much time in orbit, have you? That's why I didn't volunteer for station duty." But they'd tapped him anyway. O'Neill had grown up dirtside, and his first experience in space had been the flight to Sally Ride to go to the academy. He hadn't enjoyed it. Station Kelly-Kornienko orbited the planet Kaku. The 83-level behemoth provided retail, manufacturing, recreational, and living space for thousands of people. It was also the home of most of the S-Corp brand of directors, wealthy oligarchs who controlled much of the settled galaxy. "Look alive, people!" Commander Entebee's voice spoke directly in O'Neill's audio implant. "The board will be entering shortly. Take your stations." O'Neill glanced at Vanti, giving her dress uniform a once-over. Every crease, button, and medal sat exactly where it belonged, of course. A stray thread wouldn't dare cling to Vanti's uniform. He felt silly in the gold-trimmed formal, and hoped he looked half as professional as Vanti. She brushed a bit of lint off his collar, and they marched to their designated positions in front of the low stage erected at the edge of the circular concourse. A set of stanchions hung with velvet ropes marked off a corridor from the stage to an ornate golden door set in the wall between the float tubes. Red carpet stretched from the door to the stage. 2 more agents stood at the far end, near the door. At O'Neill and Vanti's appearance, the crowd quieted expectantly, all looking toward that closed door. "Not that we're worried about the crowds today, right?" Vanti said. O'Neill glanced across the stage at her, but Vanti's eyes never left the crowd. "A hand-picked audience rarely causes trouble." "Are you saying we're just here for appearances?" O'Neill wasn't as good at sub-vocal communication as Vanti, but he was learning. Speaking without moving your jaw or making any measurable sound took practice. Vanti, of course, was an expert. A tiny snort came through his implant. "They picked the 2 best-looking agents in the office, even though we have almost 0 real-world experience. What do you think?" "I think you got an ego like a gas giant." Although she was right about their lack of experience. They'd both ranked in the top 10 of their academy class, but this was their first real assignment. So far, patrols of the station had been completely routine and boring. As far as appearance, with her smooth red hair, sparkling green eyes, and pale skin with just a sprinkle of freckles, Vanti was one of the most attractive agents in their unit. Although he wouldn't claim to be the best-looking guy in the service, he knew his dark, curly hair and chocolate brown eyes appealed to some people. And they were both young, actually young, not artificially young. He had to admit, Vanti had a point. The crowd seemed docile, too. Based on appearances, most of them occupied the upper, more affluent levels of the station. With the exception of a few cargo handlers in suspiciously clean uniforms and a small group of clearly uncomfortable station employees huddled near the back, everyone was well-groomed and expensively clad. The ornate door slid open, and the crowd began to applaud, as if on cue. A dozen impeccably dressed men and women strode through. As they approached, O'Neill silently ticked them off in his mind, matching them to the pictures he'd memorized when he arrived on the station. Don Ahmed Ryan Smith led the way, nodding regally as he strode between the velvet ropes. His hooded eyes surveyed the crowd coldly. As chair of the board of directors, Smith was the most influential person on the station, and he clearly relished that position. Behind Smith came the rest of the directors. Dame Zuckerberg, Don Putin, Dame Morgan and her teen daughter Annabelle, Don Bezos and his drunken son Nikolai, Dame Buffett, Don Said, and Don Gates. The last in line, ancient Don Huatang, rode in a float chair, accompanied by his voluptuous and bored-looking granddaughter Gloria. The group made their way onto the stage, and the applause died as quickly as it began. O'Neill suppressed a shiver. These people were his employers, but they gave him the creeps. Thanks to aggressive and expensive aesthetic treatments, none of them, even those with teenage children, looked a day over 25, except Don Huatang, whose treatments appeared to have all given out at once. He looked to be about 200. Smith stepped forward, the cam drones focusing on his perfect, smooth face. "My dear friends, thank you for coming." His sonorous, probably specially engineered voice rolled over the crowd, warm and welcoming. "The board and I have an exciting announcement to make. This has been a banner year for the company and the station. Profits are up. Production is up. People are happy." The crowd cheered. "They're getting prompts from their hollow rings," Vanti muttered. "Really?" O'Neill glanced at her, then out at the crowd. He let the voice drone on, listening only to tone and watching the people. A moment later, Smith's voice paused, and a brief message flashed on every hollow ring. A cheer erupted from the crowd. O'Neill glanced at his ring and shook his head. Apparently, security agents were meant to be decor, not the cheering section. "And so, today I am proud to announce that all station employees are now owners. Special stocks have been issued to each of you to confirm your ownership in our great company. Check your hollow rings." Around the room, hollow rings flashed. People turned to their neighbors, whispering and questioning. Cheering broke out in earnest this time, with some people laughing or even shedding tears. "It's a lie!" A voice rose above the babble, amplified in some way. People stopped talking and turned toward the shout. "They say they're giving you stock!" A tall, thin man in wrinkled clothing shoved through the crowd, pointing an accusing finger at Don Smith. "They claim they're giving you ownership in the station. They haven't told you what it will cost you. Look at your pay rate. For every one of you, it's going down. They're not giving you ownership. They're cutting your wages." The two guards at the float tubes stared at the man, frozen. O'Neill glanced around, but no one seemed to know what to do. The cheering stopped, and the whispering grew louder. "Commander Enderby." O'Neill tried the comm, but it was down. He glanced at Vanti. She looked back, baffled. The man pushed through the front row of people, knocking one of the stanchions over. He stomped over the rope, yelling, "This special stock is a farce. The total value is only 0.1% shared among all of you." O'Neill glanced around again, then stepped forward. "I'm going to have to ask you to turn off the amplification." The man rounded on O'Neill. "You stooge! Don't you know they're using you?" He tried to push past, but O'Neill stepped in front of him. "They're using all of you!" O'Neill yanked his hollow fryer out of his belt pouch and slapped it onto the man's hand, pressing the button. "You... Hey, what happened to my amplification?" the man yelled. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't just barge in here and start a riot," O'Neill said. "Now, if you'll come with me, I'll make sure your concerns are passed through the appropriate—" Ah! The edge of the man's hand slammed into O'Neill's throat. The man shoved O'Neill away and lunged toward the stage. With a flash of copper hair, Vanti whirled across the room. Almost in slow motion, she flew off the ground, spun around, and kicked the man in the head. Her other leg slammed into his gut, and he dropped to the ground. Vanti landed lightly beside him and had a cuff on his wrist before O'Neill could find his taser. Up on the stage, Smith stared down at them. For a moment, he appeared uncertain. Then he amped up the charm. "Let's hear it for our brave security agents." The crowd cheered obediently. Smith launched back into his prepared speech. O'Neill gestured to the guards at the gold door, and one of them trotted down the red carpet. Urswith, I can't get the commander on the comms, can you? Agent Urswith's eyes widened. No, I can't. That never happens. Calm down, O'Neill whispered. Take this rabble-rouser down to holding in Level 1. On the way down, stop at the command center and have them send up more people. Take McGuire, too. Make sure this guy doesn't get away. They'll want to question him. O'Neill turned to Vanti. You stay here, and I'll stand guard by the door. We'll get the board out of here as quickly as possible, then we'll meet down in the commander's office. McGuire and Urswith hauled the man up by his arms and dragged him off to the float tubes. Vanti and O'Neill took up their new positions, but by that time, Smith had finished his speech. The board paraded back to the gold door, smiling and waving, except Dame Morgan's daughter, who narrowed her eyes and glared at Smith's back as she followed. Gloria Huatang gave O'Neill a suggestive once-over and a wink as she walked by. Smith stopped by the gold door, a hand going to his throat. He stumbled and fell against the wall, his other hand clutching at his chest. Someone shrieked. Smith's face turned blue, and he collapsed on the red carpet. Dame Morgan sank to her knees and put a hand on his chest. Gates, call medical. She looked around the room and focused on O'Neill and Vanti. He's not breathing. Are you trained in emergency medical treatment? We can do basic evaluation and emergency resuscitation. Vanti dropped down next to Morgan, her hand going to Smith's neck to check the pulse. Medical will be here in 60 seconds, Don Gates called out. Commander Entebbe paced around the conference room, fiddling with his shirt cuff. They don't know what killed him, he said. It can't have been the protester. Why would he make all that fuss if he was able to kill Smith that easily? Legrand, Vanti said. The commander gave her a questioning look. That is the protester's name, Legrand. It could have been a distraction. O'Neill rubbed his hand over his face. They'd had this exact discussion half a dozen times, including the commander forgetting the prisoner's name. Maybe a partner did something while we were all focused on Legrand. Vanti sighed, shaking her head. Nothing on the vid feeds, and they were pointed at Smith the whole time. Look, sir, we're not getting anywhere. Can we just take a break and come back to this later? Let me and Agent O'Neill go back up to the crime scene and see if we can find any additional clues. I hate investigations, Entebbe muttered. Life is so much simpler when you just have to stand guard and glare at people. O'Neill and Vanti exchanged glances. This was their first real interaction with the commander, and he appeared to be an idiot. They'd been trained in investigative techniques at the academy. Most of their teachers enjoyed this kind of challenge. They'd expected a high-ranking officer would also. Is there someone we can call in to help? O'Neill suggested. And let them think I can't do my job? Entebbe's face turned bright red. You two better figure this out, or you'll be headed dirt-side in irons before you know what hit you. Entebbe's hollow ring buzzed, and he flicked the comm open. What? Sir, we think we know what killed him. A middle-aged woman with bright eyes and a saggy chin, sure sign of a cheap regeneration job, peered excitedly from the hollow. Nanobots! What? Entebbe flopped down in a chair. You mean like the things they use to color people's hair and skin? How could nanobots kill him? That's like saying he was killed by a makeup brush. Entebbe definitely wasn't the hottest star in the galaxy. He was injected with nanobots that could be triggered to stop his heart. We managed to isolate some. The programmers say they could have been in his system for hours or even days before being triggered. They were designed to do the job when triggered, then dissolve. But whoever designed this attack didn't realize the bots would stop reacting properly once the host was dead, so they didn't dissolve on schedule. Is there any way to track these nanobots back to their source? O'Neill asked. Any kind of marker? Entebbe nodded enthusiastically. Yes, good idea, O'Brien. O'Neill, Vanti snapped. Sir, why don't you let us handle this? I'm sure there are other things only you can attend to. She gave him a fawning smile that didn't reach her eyes. Right. Entebbe heaved himself out of the chair, frowning at the woman on the hollow. Collins, work with O'Brien and Fieraganti on this. I need to talk to Dame Morgan. He flicked the vid over to the room connection and stomped out the door. Oh, sure he remembers her name, Vanti groused under her breath. Who? Dame Morgan. She's a board member. He knows who signs the paychecks. Ty muttered back. The woman in the vid smiled tiredly at them. I'm Dr. Isabel Corwin. Ty O'Neill. He pointed at himself. And she's Vanti Fioravanti. I need to run some more tests and I'll get back to you on tracking these. The woman reached forward to flick off her hollow feed, but stopped. Glancing around the room, she made a little face and leaned in close to the cam. In case you were wondering about the commander's qualifications, well, he's Don Gates' cousin. 2. I can't believe you let them talk me into this! Vanti paced around the tiny compartment, shoving her hands through her hair. The wavy strands, bleached a dirty blonde color, fell around her face. I joined the academy to get away from this lower-level lifestyle. She glared at the dingy walls, the worn sofa, the threadbare carpet. Hey, I didn't let them do anything. You agreed on your own. It's not like we really had a choice anyway. O'Neill snapped the metal latch hook into the loop set into the wall. He climbed down from the rickety futon, afraid it would collapse if he stepped in the middle. At the other end, he stepped back up, snapping the other hook into another loop on the opposite wall. The hammock swung gently above the futon, casting wavering shadows below. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to get into that thing, but it's up. Vanti glanced at the hammock, but didn't stop pacing. Fan-fracking-tastic work, Agent O'Neill. Or should I say, Mikhail Leland? I think I'll call you Mick. That sounds like something Elisa would call her partner. Vanti. Lisa, she snapped. Lisa, calm down. We're undercover. You would have begged for a chance to do this when we were at the academy. Going undercover is supposed to be glamorous, not tatty. Vanti looked at the futon again, then moved over to the counter and leaned against it instead. Welcome to the real world. O'Neill flopped down on the futon, raising a puff of dust. You can sleep in the hammock if you want. I think it's cleaner. Ugh, I'd rather sleep on the dusty futon. Hammocks make me motion sick. She dropped down next to O'Neill, coughing dramatically. Do you really think we'll be able to discover anything they don't already know? O'Neill shrugged. Don Said seemed to think so. Dr. Corwin said the nanobots were created on station. The informant pointed them to this esthetician, and while we're investigating, we can also gauge the general climate here in the lower levels. If there are more people who feel like that protester, the board needs to know. Vanti looked around the room, as if searching for someone eavesdropping. Do you think he was right? I mean, from what I've seen of Smith, promising worthless stock shares to offset pay cuts sounds like something he'd do. O'Neill shifted uncomfortably. His whole life, he'd been taught to support the chain of command. His gut reaction was to believe in those in charge. But in the few weeks they'd been on station, he'd heard too many rumors about Smith. And then there was Entebbe. That guy should have been standing guard at a munitions bunker, not commanding a station unit. His faith in the chain was starting to wear thin. Our mission is to track down those nanobots, not to investigate the board. Right, the mission. Vanti jumped up again and crossed the 5 steps to the far side of the compartment. Why don't you practice getting into that hammock while I stand way over here? It only took 5 tries. On the 5th try, he got in, but flipped right back out. He landed flat on his back in a puff of dust, the wind knocked out of him. Are you sure you don't want the hammock? He gasped for breath on the futon. Vanti leaned against the counter, weak from laughing too hard. Nope, you got this. You were almost there. The 6th time was the charm. The next morning, O'Neill discovered getting out of the hammock was nearly as difficult as getting in. This explains why the futon is in such terrible shape, Vanti said, after he finally resorted to swinging until he flipped out onto the dusty padding. I'm spending my first paycheck on a bunk bed, O'Neill grumbled, shuffling into the tiny bathroom. When he came back out, Vanti handed him a protein bar. I made breakfast. We have an auto kitchen. It must make eggs and toast, or cereal. I don't know. I don't eat that stuff, Vanti said. Besides, you're running late for work, Mick. You don't eat eggs and toast? I would never have signed a domestic contract with a woman who doesn't eat toast. O'Neill opened the door and led the way down a hall toward the radial corridor. No, I don't eat bad auto kitchen food. Vanti grimaced. We only had the most basic food maps when I was a kid, and I vowed I would never go back after I got a decent job. That's what kept me in school, even when I hated it. O'Neill glanced back at her as they stepped out onto the concourse. Vanti never talked about her family or life before the academy, and she seemed to love even the worst parts of academy life. So, what do you eat then? Mostly takeout, and salads. You can get some good deals at the farmer's market on level 25. And I've purchased a couple really expensive maps for special treats. Strawberry gelato from Saerdes, Eggs Benedict by Chef Ming-Tu Verazian. Vanti sighed and took a bite of her protein bar. I'd rather eat these than cheap auto kitchen eggs. Lots more food choices on the surface, O'Neill said, stepping into the float tube line. At shift change, the float tubes clogged up a bit. He made a mental note to leave the compartment earlier tomorrow. Yeah, but dirt side agents don't get paid as well, she replied. I'll suck it up a few years and save up some credits. They took the float tube up to level 9. I'm going to chat up the other business owners here while you get to work, sweetie. Vanti kissed him on the cheek. Sweetie, it's our cover, she whispered. We're supposed to be contracted. That means pet names and kissing. O'Neill eyed her. He usually thought of Vanti as a work partner, not a woman. But she was pretty, and fit, and... Smack! Vanti slapped him on the back of the head. It's our cover. Don't let it go to your head. She blew him a kiss and walked away. I should have made her get the job, O'Neill muttered as he knocked on the plasglass door of Doable Do. A stick-thin man in a black skin suit waved the door open. A shock of lime-green hair grew in a fringe above his forehead and curled out over his eyes. The rest of his head and face shone like polished brass in the glare of the overhead lights. Drawn-on eyebrows hovered over piercing orange eyes. Matching orange lipstick highlighted his perfect bow-shaped lips. Are you Mikhail Leland? O'Neill smiled and held out a fist to Bump. Yeah, call me Mick. How are you today? The man shook his head. This just won't do. Turn around. What? O'Neill dropped his hand to his side. Turn around. The man made a spinning motion with his hand. I want to see what I have to work with. O'Neill turned slowly in place. Why, are you doing this? Consider it part of the interview. The other man looked him carefully up and down as he spun. I'm Tabin. Moiri told me you'd be coming by. I get final approval on all stylists and assistants in my shop. And right now, I'm thinking... He paused for a long moment. No. What? No one had mentioned an interview. The job was supposed to have been a done deal, set up by one of the unit's contacts. I thought I'd be working for Moiri? Tabin heaved a dramatic sigh. You would be. But as I told you, I get final approval on all new employees. You must meet the aesthetic standards of my salon to be hired. O'Neill looked at him. The man ran a mediocre salon on level 5, and he claimed to have standards? He raked his hand through his darkened hair. Do I need a haircut? What are the standards? Tabin ran a loving hand over his own knobby ribs and convex stomach. I suppose your face is adequate, but you need to have the body. I can't see anything with that. His face wrinkled in distaste as he waved a languid hand towards O'Neill. Coverall. O'Neill closed his eyes and counted to 10. What do I need to do to get this job? I don't have enough credit to pay for a shuttle dirtside, so I need to work. Vanti laughed so hard she must have nearly wet herself. Oh my God! You! She leaned against the wall, tears running down her face. O'Neill glared. With the new platinum blonde, high and tight, flat top cut, his nose looked sharper and his eyes deeper set. I'm not worried about the hair. It'll grow. I'm more concerned about my dignity. I was barely able to talk him out of green skin and blue eyes.
He unzipped his coverall and dropped the sleeves off his arms.
Vanti started howling again. He made you wear an electric blue skin suit. Oh my God! You should sue for sexual harassment. She fell onto the futon, wrapping her arms around her middle as she wailed with laughter. The cloud of dust caught in her throat, and her laughter became a coughing fit. O'Neill glared. Tell me you learned something so I can stop humiliating myself. If anyone had told me 4 years ago that I'd be sweeping up hair wearing something from a bad music vid, I'd have laughed myself silly. Well, I'm doing that now, so full circle. Vanti pulled herself together and sat up. Okay, here's what I've got. According to all the neighbors, Tabin definitely has alternate income. The neighbors say very few clients frequent the place. The Sprejai collects protection money from everyone on the level, and he pays just like everyone else. And he still has money to pay rent. That credit is coming from somewhere. So you think he's our guy? O'Neill grabbed a pair of shorts and a shirt from his bag and headed to the tiny bathroom. Don't jump the gun. Vanti shook her head. I think he's worth checking out. I can't believe our first target would be the winner, can you? It's never that easy. Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm going to change into something actually comfortable. But you look so good in blue, Grizz, Vanti called as he closed the bathroom door. When he came back out, Vanti had laid dinner out on the tiny table. Since you're the working half of this contract, I figured I should make dinner. Got some nice greens on level 25. Is that farmer's market sanctioned? O'Neill tossed his skin suit into the hammock and sat down at the table. We're not on black market duty, so don't ask. Vanti handed him a bowl. And if you get it shut down, I will make you sorry. The meal was good. Rice, beans, sautéed greens, and a spicy sauce. Where'd you learn to cook? He chased the last bean around the bowl with a spoon and scooped it into his mouth. I know how to find recipe vids and follow directions. Since it's all gone, I assume you liked it? She stirred her own bowl and nibbled on a tiny bite. Yeah, it was great. I'm glad you didn't take the cover job after all, or I'd be cooking. We'd both be sorry. 3. The next few weeks followed the same pattern. O'Neill spent the day cleaning up in doable do. Every week, Tabin insisted on changing his look, and he acquired 4 more brightly colored, shiny, form-fitting suits. The curses he uttered while getting dressed owed as much to his appearance as to the difficulty in getting into the skin-tight garb. Meanwhile, Vanti snooped around the lower levels, shopping and asking questions. Locals were friendly, but cautious around strangers, and she picked up little useful information. In the evenings, they picked a level and walked all the rings and radials, chatting with anyone who would engage. Thursday night, they strolled through level 17. Although it was late, according to the station's arbitrary time clock, most of the businesses stayed open. Keeping a business alive on the lower levels took a lot more than 40 hours a week. They strolled the circumference of Ring E and turned outstation on Radial 3. At the corner to D Ring, a large, curly-haired man in stained clothing blocked their way. O'Neill urged Vanti around him, but the man stepped in front of them. Vanti dodged left, and O'Neill went right. Curly blocked O'Neill, and another equally large man stepped out of the shadows into Vanti's path. The Chesna invites you to join her for a late meal. The first man showed his teeth as if he'd been told to smile, but would prefer to chew asteroids. The who invites us where? Vanti asked, reaching slowly into her pocket. She probably had a knife in there. O'Neill laid a hand on her arm. Not that Vanti would need a weapon to take these guys. O'Neill had sparred with her in many classes. He was proud to say he'd beaten her. Once.
The Chesna.
She is the Duchess of the Sprejai. You may have heard of the Sprejai. Curly gestured for them to follow the second man down D-ring. Please, follow my psershal.
Vanti and Ty exchanged looks and turned to follow.
Follow his satchel? Vanti muttered. O'Neill shrugged. Satchel means friend in Polish. The man behind them leaned close and lowered his voice conspiratorially. We don't use names in front of outsiders. You understand. Where is Satchel taking us? Vanti demanded. The man ignored her. About halfway down the corridor, Satchel stopped, waving his hollow ring at a door marked Maintenance. The door whooshed open, and Vanti and O'Neill exchanged another look. Does Satchel work for the station? Vanti asked. Satchel ignored her and stomped into the duct, ducking beneath the low-hanging conduits. The narrow duct forced them to walk single file, so O'Neill let Vanti take the lead. If it came down to a fight, he was confident he could incapacitate one of their escorts, but he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Satchel turned again, and a door opened automatically as he approached. He ducked into the bot garage, and they all crowded in. With a grunt, Satchel popped open a panel and revealed a ladder. We'll climb down from here, he said, his voice high-pitched and grating. It sounded odd coming from his massive form. Level 11. Why don't we just take the float tubes? O'Neill suggested. We'd love to meet the Chesna. Chesna, Curly corrected, squeezing in behind them. Vanti climbed on top of one of the cleaning bots to make more room. Curly shut the door with a flick of his hollow ring. She prefers to keep this visit private. Private from whom? O'Neill asked, but neither man answered. Satchel swung onto the ladder and quickly dropped out of sight. Curly nodded at Vanti. You're next. I'm not sure I can climb down 6 levels, Vanti said breathlessly. That's a long way, and I'm not that strong. The man laughed, much louder and longer than necessary. You'll be fine. He pointed at the hatch. Vanti shook her head, but followed directions. Your partner is very amusing, Curly told O'Neill. Yeah, so are you. He climbed in after Vanti. You know there are cams all over this station. Vanti's voice carried up the shaft. Anyone with access to the feeds will know where we are. Save it for the Duchess, O'Neill hissed down at her. Listen to your friend, Curly said. He's a smart man, even if he doesn't look like one. By the time they reached level 11, O'Neill's biceps burned and sweat beaded on his forehead. He swiped a hand over his face and through his hair. This week it was tawny, shoulder-length waves. The long strands stuck to his neck and cheeks. Once this assignment was over, he vowed he'd never have long hair again. Satchel led them out of another bot closet and through the ducts to a narrow door made of synthwood. Unlike the usual duct doors, this one opened on hinges instead of an automated sliding mechanism. Clearly it had been retrofitted, which meant the compartment on the other side had not originally been connected to the ducts. He signaled Vanti in finger code. Unknown adversary, be ready. Vanti rolled her eyes and gave him the "you think" sign. At least that's what he assumed that gesture meant. Satchel knocked and scratched at the door in a complex pattern. A few seconds later, it opened into a dark room.
Satchel stepped aside, and Curly prodded Vanti and O'Neill through.
Good luck, Curly said, shutting them into the dark. A light flared overhead. O'Neill sidestepped away from the door and whirled in one quick motion. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Vanti do the same, in the opposite direction. They stood there, half-crouched, ready for action. Bravo! You were like dancers, perfectly in step. A tiny old woman sat on a large throne on a raised step on the far side of the room. She wore an orange cardigan over a black shirt, and a fluffy pink blanket covered her legs. As they straightened, She raised a bottle of beer in salute and took a swig. "You are the Chensa?"
Vanti asked.
"Chesna," the old woman corrected. Then she shrugged. "It's hard to pronounce if you don't speak the language." "Do you speak the language? I thought ancient Earth languages were all dead." Vanti strolled across the room and dropped into one of the chairs grouped around a table near the throne. O'Neill admired her cool. The woman laughed. "They are dead, but that doesn't mean no one speaks them. I learned Polish at my mother's knee. Well, at least a few words of it. Enough chit-chat. Tell me why 2 security agents are pretending to be lower-lev drones." "How? What do you mean?" O'Neill's voice cracked a little. With that old woman staring down at him, he felt 15 instead of 25. "Don't bother," Vanti said briskly. "The Polish mafia obviously has people embedded in S-Corp. She probably knows our ID numbers and favorite foods." The Chesna shrugged. "You are Tiberius O'Neill y Mendoza bin Tariq A. Reynolds, and Lindsay Fioravanti Rodriguez Changi Bucafoni, commonly known as Vanti. I could get your ID numbers, of course, but favorite foods are harder. I'd say pizza?" She pointed at O'Neill, then tilted her head, staring at Vanti. "Creme brulee?" Vanti's lips quirked. "Close enough. We're investigating a murder." "The chair! Good riddance, I'd say." The Chesna flipped the blanket aside and stood. She wore tight denim pants and boots with sparkly stones embedded in swirling patterns. Although her face looked to be about 90 years old, she had the body of a much younger woman, or one who'd had all the top-grade aesthetic mods. "But the how is intriguing. What do your scientists say?" "Nanobots," Vanti said. "Vanti!" O'Neill was stunned at her lack of discretion. Vanti shook her head. "She already knows. I think she can help us, but she's only going to do that if we help her. And the first step to making that kind of mutually beneficial agreement is establishing trust." "Listen to your partner, young man." The Chesna stepped down from the dais. "The Spreshai does not tolerate murder on our station." She pinned him with her iron gaze. "We also will not tolerate interference. If you don't choose to help us, we will remove you from the situation." "What do you mean, remove?" O'Neill said with a gulp. "Our specialty." She smiled pleasantly. "We are experts at making people disappear. Don't worry, we don't kill anyone." She held up a hand, warding off such an idea. "We just remove you from the station." "If that's not a euphemism for killing, I don't know what you mean," O'Neill said. Vanti looked up. "Exactly what she said. I've heard of the Sprejai. They relocate people. Sometimes willingly, sometimes not. But if you don't want to end up penniless and without ID or hollow ring in a swamp on Grissom, I suggest we cooperate." She looked up at the older woman. "We think he was injected 2 to 3 days before he died. Then the nanobots were activated remotely. One of our sources pointed us to Tabin as a possible source." The Chesna pulled 2 more bottles of beer from a small fridge behind the throne and handed them to Vanti and O'Neill. "My sources also suggest Tabin might be involved. We know he supplies unlicensed nanobots to anyone willing to pay. But he isn't the killer." She plopped down in another chair and waved at the third. "Have a seat, Agent O'Neill. We have much to discuss."
4.
O'Neill peered through the open bathroom door at Vanti's reflection in the mirror. Her mottled blonde hair stuck out in 2 tails from each side of her head. She caught his eye and gave him a glare. O'Neill clamped down on a laugh and turned away. "What are you laughing at?" Vanti straightened her short, flowered skirt and tucked in her white, puffy-sleeved blouse. "This Polish costume is ridiculous, but not as stupid as that." She waved a hand at him, encompassing his entire body, which was currently encased in a lime-green stretch-tight skinsuit. O'Neill held up his hands in surrender. "I know, but if I don't laugh, I'll cry. It's been 2 weeks since we started working with the Chesna. We need a break soon, or I might just grab a pair of shears and go on a wild hair-hacking rampage. I'll start with these stupid green dreadlocks. I might skewer someone with a chopstick first, and it might be you if you keep leaving your dirty clothes lying around. She slipped the toe of her ankle-high station boot under a discarded shirt and deftly kicked it at his head. He laughed and grabbed the shirt as it sailed at his face. He spun and tossed it into the basket behind the futon. 2! Then he grabbed a protein bar and tossed it to her. We gotta move. They headed down the hall toward the float tubes. You know, the Chestnut claims to be some kind of Polish expert, but I'm pretty sure chopsticks weren't used in Poleville. My great-grandmother was Chinese, and she used chopsticks. China was halfway around the earth from Poleville. Vanti ripped open her breakfast and took a bite. O'Neill shrugged. I'm not telling her. I don't want to end up in a desert on Armstrong with medically induced amnesia. I'll see you after work. It's your turn to get dinner. Vanti leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. Bye, darling. Oh, no, that is not going to work. One of these days I'll come up with a pet name I can live with. With a finger wave, she stepped into the float tube. O'Neill followed a moment later, exiting on level 5 to endure another sweaty, humiliating day at Doable Do. He set the mini vacuum bot to run each time Moiri finished with a client. Then he wiped down all the surfaces and stacked towels and equipment at each station according to the day's schedule. He finished with time to kill before the shop opened. None of the stylists had arrived, so he set an alert on the door and let himself through the storage area and into the business office in the back. He'd been in here several times over the past month and found nothing. He'd used a hacking program written by the code jockeys upstairs to break into Tabin's accounts, but they showed only legitimate purchases and expenses. Either Tabin was clean, unlikely, according to the Chesna, or he was extremely careful. He wandered around the room, hoping something would just jump out at him. Nothing out of the ordinary. No secret safe hidden behind a picture, no handwritten ledgers detailing sales of contraband, no secret passageways behind a bookshelf. The front door alert pinged. A quick look around confirmed the only place to hide was under the desk. If Tabin came in and found him hiding, he'd be screwed. He moved to the door and out into the supply room. Shouldn't even let you into the shop this late. Moiri and that stupid assistant of hers will be here any minute, Tabin said. We will be here only 2 minutes, a scratchy voice replied. But I must have the product today. Now. Even through the poor quality audio feed, O'Neill could hear the menace in the voice. This could be the break he'd been waiting for. He ducked behind the last row of shelves, hoping the product wasn't hidden here, between the hair color and skin toners. The door swished open, and O'Neill peeked between the boxes and cartons, cursing himself for not installing surveillance cams when he first arrived. He'd thought about it, but figured he could have the techies upstairs review station surveillance for him. Now he realized Tabin would have disabled or spoofed any station cams in the shop if he was doing illegal business. Rookie mistake. Tabin and a tall woman with dark hair and startling white skin walked in. Tabin wore a drab robe which he threw off as soon as the door closed. Underneath, he sported his usual flamboyantly colored stretch-tight skin suit. Today his hair was red and curly, with flowers woven in. The woman wore a standard SK2 station coverall, with an ops badge on the chest. O'Neill used his hollow ring to snap a couple pictures. Even if the station cams were useless, he should have enough pics to run an ID program. As the two moved closer to his end of the room, he crouched down behind the shelves, wishing his own clothing was less colorful. Here it is, Tabin said from the other side of the box O'Neill hid behind. Heart pounding and palms sweating, O'Neill held his breath. The other man was so close. No one ever uses body sculpt anymore, so it's a perfect place to keep the product. I don't care where you keep it. The woman's scratchy voice grated over O'Neill's spine, sending shivers through his body. Just give it to me. Clicking and whirring noises drifted through the room. Perfect. This checks out. And you've given me 5 doses as requested. I'm not giving you anything, Tabin said pleasantly. I'm selling you 5 doses. 5,300 credits. Each.
Of course, the woman replied, but I don't need 5 doses. I only need 4. I'll leave this one with you.
Tabin shrieked. Something slammed against the shelf, raining boxes, packages, and bottles down on O'Neill's head. It slammed again, and the shelf crashed down, pinning O'Neill beneath it.
What are you doing? I'm your only source. You need me.
Tabin's voice went from begging to demanding.
I needed you. The gravelly voice stressed the past tense. But I don't need you anymore. Once this job is finished, I'll disappear, and I don't need to leave any evidence behind.
No! Tabin called, but the door swooshed open and the woman was gone. O'Neill shoved against the shelf, but it wouldn't move. The shelf against the back wall had prevented it from crushing him, leaving a narrow triangle of space. He flicked his hollow ring. Vanti, find this woman. She just left the doable do. I don't know where she's headed, but she's our target. He flicked the pictures to her and signed off before she could reply. Who's there? Tabin cried. It's me, Mick. He pushed broken bottles and equipment away, trying to clear a path to the end of the shelf. What did she do to you? She injected me with the nanobots, he cried. She's going to kill me. Is there any way to stop the process? O'Neill inched forward. No, Tabin wailed. She's going to kill me. All she has to do is send the command and the nanobots will stop my heart. Karma's a bitch, isn't it? O'Neill thought. Who is she? Who is her target? I don't know. We don't exchange names in this kind of business, and I don't want to know what she's going to do with the product. You have to help me. The shelf shook. O'Neill looked up between the shelves and saw Tabin slumped against the angled metal. If you get off the shelf, I can get out and help you, O'Neill said, trying to sound reasonable. No one can help me! Tabin's cry wavered up into a keen. O'Neill pushed his shoulder against the shelf and shoved up with his legs as hard and fast as he could. Tabin and the shelf jolted, and the rest of the contents fell to the floor. O'Neill shoved again, and Tabin stumbled across the aisle to the other shelf. O'Neill threw the shelf off and staggered out of the tumbled piles of destroyed beauty products. He ran to Tabin and grabbed his shoulders. Tell me what you know about that woman. How did she find you? What else have you sold her? Quickly, before it's too late. Tabin's face turned grey, and he began sweating. A hand went to his throat. Body sculpt, he whispered. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. O'Neill dropped down beside him, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. He activated a med alert on his hollow ring and started resuscitation. Medical took 5 minutes to arrive. The hospital was on level 45, a trip that should take little more than 60 seconds. But emergencies on the lower levels apparently rated a less speedy response. As soon as the med techs arrived, O'Neill called Vanti. Where are you? He demanded. I'm in the float tube. I called security command. They followed your perp via vid. They got her leaving the doable do. She took the float tube, but they spotted her on level 63. She went into an office in B ring. I'm on my way there now. Wait for backup. Are they sending someone? Yes, Mother, I'm waiting. I'm on 63 now. I'll flip you the body cam feed. A vid popped up on O'Neill's hollow. Vanti's breathing rasped through the feed as she ran down Radial 4. She pounded down the corridor and skidded around the corner at B ring. She took up position outside compartment 26, her back against the wall. ETA? O'Neill asked. He dragged his eyes away from the hollow and focused on the mess around him. Med techs worked on Tabin, but their movements had slowed, as if they knew it was too late. The shelf that had fallen on O'Neill lay tilted against the back wall, the contents scattered across the floor. Command says they're on the level now, Vanti replied. She turned back the way she'd come, as 5 armored security agents ran up the hallway. They took up positions, had ops pop the door, and streamed into the compartment. Clear, clear, clear. Vanti stepped into the room. Where is she? O'Neill demanded. Vanti turned slowly. so he could see the whole room. She's gone. 5. People spilled out of the happy pole in the usual lunchtime rush. O'Neill pushed between bodies, ignoring the strange looks and snickers his clothing inspired. Once he got through the door, the crowd thinned, as most of them were queued up at the to-go line. He took a seat in the corner of the room, at one of the few empty tables. The chestnut dozed in a throne against the back wall. O'Neill did a double take. The throne appeared to be a twin to the one she'd been sitting in when they first met. She took her Duchess title seriously. Vanti had warned him never to approach the Chesna when she was sleeping, so he ordered a beer and waited. The crowd flowed around him, dwindling as lunchtime ended, and folks headed back to work. Finally, Vanti stepped out of the kitchen. Her blonde hair hung limply on either side of her head, and a sheen covered her face. She wiped her hands on a towel, threw it down on the counter, and crossed to O'Neill's table. "Let's go talk to her," she said, jerking her head at the Chesna. "I thought we had to wait until she wakes up." O'Neill stood and followed Vanti across the room. "She's awake. She's playing Galactic Aviator on a Neuralink." Vanti pointed at a tiny red light on the throne. "The light turns green so Yan knows when she's receiving. She gets pissed if you interrupt her, but she called you here, so she'll see us." The Chesna's eyes opened, and the tiny light turned green. "I'm sure you won't tell anyone our little secret," she said, pointing at the tiny light. "Sit here." She waved at 2 low stools that sat on the dais next to her throne. O'Neill gave Vanti a questioning look, but she just sat down. He followed her lead. A faint hum and vibration started, and the dais turned slowly, rotating through the wall. Seconds later, they found themselves in the same room where they had visited the Chesna the first time. "Nifty," O'Neill said. "What's up with the accent?" The Chesna shrugged. "It's expected. You can't be Duchess of the Polish Mafia if you sound like a station rat." All trace of the accent was gone. "Another thing," O'Neill said. He was in a grumpy mood and didn't care if the Duchess knew it. "The first time we came here, you insisted we climb down an access shaft to avoid notice. Seems to me sitting on a turning platform in front of a full restaurant is hardly stealthy." "Now that Lisa is working here, your visit is feasible, and it is not unusual for me to summon the partners of new employees for a private visit. You can get away with a lot when you're the Chesna. As to the rotating dais, I like a little drama. But no." She threw off the blanket and stood. "We have work to do." "What work?" O'Neill crossed his arms and stayed stubbornly in his seat. "I basically witnessed a murder, didn't manage to stop it, and the killer got away. Forensics didn't find any more body sculpt boxes, so we don't even have any hard evidence." "Stop griping, Grizz." Vanti stood. "It was my fault she got away, not yours." She turned toward the Chesna. "What's your plan?" The Chesna moved toward the synthwood door. "We're going up to 63 to check out the compartment she disappeared from." O'Neill stared at the old woman in disbelief. "No offense, but how's that going to work? I'm not sure I can climb 50-plus levels. I have a hard time believing you can." The woman grinned. "First, we aren't climbing. Second, I'm not as ancient as I look." She slid her fingers up into her hairline and did something. As they watched, her face changed. Her cheeks filled in, her eyes brightened, her wrinkles slowly smoothed out. In 60 seconds, her apparent age went from 90 to 40. Even her hair looked fuller. "How did you do that?" Vanti breathed. She pulled back her white hair, revealing a series of tiny silver dots along her hairline. "Programmable visual disruption field. It lays the image of an older woman over my own face." Her fingers twitched in her hairline again, and the wrinkled crone reappeared. "If you look closely, you can see that the wrinkles aren't real. But no one gets that close to the Chesna." "If I what? Put it on? Had one installed? Whatever. If I had one of these, would I look like you?" Vanti leaned in close to inspect the Chesna's face. "Installed. The nodes are implanted under the skin and draw power from my body. No, you would look like an older version of you." O'Neill realized his mouth was hanging open and shut it. Then he opened it again to ask, "Why?"
Continuity. It allows the chestnut to reign for a long time. I'm actually the third woman to hold this position in the last 20 years. My mother and sister were chestnut before me, but they've since retired. We look a lot alike. Once you add the PVD field, we're almost indistinguishable.
Vanti asked, "Are they still here on SK2? The chestnut turned back to Vanti.
My sister, Marcella, is still here. She works in another part of the station. She filled in as chestnut last week when I went dirtside for vacation. I enjoy betting on the dog races. Come."
And with that, she led the way out the door. They went back to the bot closet Curly and Satchel had brought them through. The chestnut unlocked a cabinet. She pulled out a flat panel with 2 notches cut in one side.
"Here, hold this."
She shoved it at O'Neill. Then she opened the access panel to the ladder shaft.
"Now stick it in here."
O'Neill hesitated. "Why are you helping us?" He waved off her obvious answer. "I know you don't want murder on the station, but you've just shared your identity with us. Doesn't that make us dangerous to you? Why would you do that?" The woman sighed.
"Honestly, being the chestnut kind of sucks. I mean, I'm stuck on that stupid throne all day. If I turn off the PVD, I can go out, but I still have to maintain a distance from most people. Since you're SEC agents, I'm pretty sure you two aren't going to try to blackmail or out me."
She shrugged again.
"I guess I'm bored. Besides, if you betray me, I'll deny everything and make you disappear."
She smiled and turned back to the ladder shaft. The notches in the panel fit over the side rails of the ladder. The chestnut flicked a switch on the panel and stepped up onto it.
"Come on. And while I have the PVD deactivated, call me Sonia."
Vanti and O'Neill climbed onto the flimsy-looking platform. It vibrated quietly, then started moving up the shaft.
"I can't believe those goons made us climb down the ladder," Vanti said. "I don't let them use the lift panel," Sonia said. "They need to stay in shape."
It took about 10 minutes to get up to level 63. They climbed out through the access hatch, and O'Neill removed the lift panel at Sonia's request.
"Stash it behind that bot."
Sonia pointed across the bot closet. O'Neill stuck the panel behind the bot, and Sonia stuck a note on the bot. "Broken. Don't move." She smiled, moving toward the door.
"Sometimes low-tech is best."
"Hang on," Vanti said. "That woman disappeared from an internal compartment. That means there's an access other than the public corridors. This station is a standard build on every level, so we should be able to reach that access from here, just like we can reach your restaurant from the bot closet." She pointed downward. O'Neill snapped his fingers. "Good call. Sonia, do you have access to station schematics?" Sonia nodded and flicked her hollow ring. She flipped through a series of screens, then popped one open.
"Here's level 63. It looks like there should be a duct from here to the compartment, right through there."
She pointed at another bot.
"There's an access behind that bot."
O'Neill dragged the bot out of the way and ducked down into the space behind it.
"There's a panel here, but it's activated by the bot. Can you turn it on?"
Vanti fiddled with the bot for a few minutes.
"Nope. You're going to have to do it manually."
"Are there any tools here?" O'Neill poked his head back out. Sonia dug through a couple cabinets, then handed him a device.
"Try this."
"Perfect." O'Neill popped the panel open. "We'll have to crawl."
"No,"
said Sonia. She pitched the level schematic to his hollow ring.
"You can crawl. Vanti and I will go through the public corridors and meet you there."
"Thanks a lot," O'Neill muttered. But they were already gone. He flipped on the glow feature of his hollow and crawled into the duct. The cleaning bots used these ducts to reach the compartments in the level, and they were only as tall as the bots required. The ducts they'd used down on level 11 must have been modified to allow more comfortable access for the Sprejai. O'Neill tried crawling. He tried scooting on his butt. He tried duck walking. None of them were comfortable. By the time he reached a space which the schematic showed backed up on the compartment, he was sweating and his knees ached. The duct looked exactly the same here, No obvious doors or panels. He pounded on the duct wall. All that did was make his ears ring. He flicked his hollow ring and called Vanti. A tiny hollow of her popped up in his palm. "I'm here. How do I get out?" She shrugged. "We don't see any obvious accesses here." "Ugh, I don't want to crawl all the way back." He massaged his lower back. "Maybe I'll just sleep here tonight." He crawled a little further and finally found a panel. Using the tool Sonia had given him, he opened it and stepped out into a small closet. He groaned, slowly straightening. "Next time, you get to crawl through the ducts." "Where are you?" Vanti asked. "Not sure." He climbed over discarded shoes, ducked through a rack of clothing, and opened the door. An ear-piercing scream rang through the room, just before a vase slammed into his shoulder. 6. O'Neill flung up his hands. "Stop! I'm a security agent, I won't hurt you!" The vase dropped to the floor, bouncing once. A little girl stood across the room, glass picture frame clutched in her hand.
"What are you doing in our closet?"
She shrieked. "Vanti, help me out here," he muttered. No response. "I'm just, checking security on the station. There's a bot access in the closet that needs to be locked. I'll open a maintenance ticket on it." The girl's eyes narrowed.
"If you're a sec agent, where's your badge?"
He flicked his hollow ring and pulled up his credentials. Stepping forward, he held out his hand so she could see the file in his palm. She raised the frame a few centimeters, and he froze. That vase had hurt, and this frame looked even heavier. He flicked the file toward the girl. She caught the file on her own hollow and looked at it.
"Where's your uniform?"
She carefully set the frame down on a table. "I'm undercover. People get nervous if they see a sec agent wandering around looking at things, so we do our checks in plain clothes. I'm Ty."
"I'm Izzy. I like your hair."
She reached out and touched one of his dreadlocks.
"My mom makes me comb mine."
"Where are you?" Vanti's voice echoed through his ear. "Oh, now you can hear me. It's just good luck I wasn't permanently impaired by a vase thrown by a 12-year-old.
"You think I'm 12?
The girl dissolved into giggles.
I'm 6.
"Even better. A 6-year-old almost brained me." She giggled even harder.
"I didn't almost brain you. That vase is rubber. It doesn't hurt."
She picked up the vase and squished it in her hand, then bounced it off her head. "Give me that." O'Neill grabbed the vase, squeezing it experimentally. "Wow, I'll be an alien's mutt. It didn't feel like rubber when it hit me. The frame, too."
"Course. My mom doesn't let us have breakable stuff. The baby might hurt himself."
She pointed to a playpen in the corner. Fortunately, it was empty. "Could we please get back on task?" Vanti's voice ratcheted up a couple notes. "Is this child's mother anywhere nearby? We need to question her about that duct, and—" The sound of cracking electricity was the last thing O'Neill heard. "But you won't press charges?" The whining tone grated on O'Neill's nerves. "I think we can overlook the incident." Vanti's voice came from far away. "Your stunner is illegal, but Agent O'Neill entered your compartment without advance notice or proper identification." "I had proper ID." O'Neill coughed and tried again. "I showed the girl, Izzy." "Izzy is 6, and you were already in my compartment when you showed it to her." A frazzled-looking woman in an expensive suit loomed over him. O'Neill sat up. "He's a sec agent, and we have the right to inspect every square centimeter of this station." Vanti rounded on the woman. "You attacked a member of an active security detail. We could have sent you dirtside in a heartbeat." The woman deflated. "No, don't do that. Izzy's father is down there." "The planet isn't big enough for both of you." O'Neill climbed slowly to his feet. He looked around the room. "Where's Sonia?" Vanti gave a tiny headshake and turned back to the woman. "Did anyone come through this compartment earlier today?" "Would I have left my daughter alone if someone had?" The woman dropped onto the child-sized bed.
She flicked her hollow ring and pulled up surveillance footage. I'll throw you the nanny cam recording. Nanny cam? Have you been spying on me? The little girl stared at her mother, outraged. You said I was old enough to stay home alone. I don't watch it, Stardust. I promise I don't. It's just in case. O'Neill tuned out the arguing voices and focused on the vid. There she is. The mother's voice cut off, mid-word. She watched, mouth open, as the woman in the image strolled across Izzy's room and stepped into the closet. She could be anywhere. Vanti rubbed the back of her neck. Well, I guess that's all we need to see here. Ma'am, I'm going to have to confiscate your stunner as evidence. The woman pulled the child toward her. You can have it, but I need a safe place to stay. We can't live here. O'Neill waved a hand at her. I'll put in a maintenance ticket to have the access hatch sealed. Go stay with friends for a few days. They'll let you know when it's done. They left the woman frantically calling friends in search of a temporary home. Why doesn't she just lock the closet? Vanti led the way down the hall to the next compartment and jerked a thumb at the door. Sonia's inside. We still don't know how this woman... Let's call her TDC. Vanti interrupted. Tall, dark, and creepy. O'Neill snorted. Fine. We don't know how TDC got from 26 to Izzy's compartment. Yes, we do. Sonia stood inside the single room, holding the discarded coverall. Care to share that information, Sonia? O'Neill grated out. Sonia reached out and touched a seemingly blank spot on the wall. The wall shimmered, as if a wave of heat flowed over it, and then a seam appeared. A seam around a standard-sized door. Similar technology to my PVD, she said. I would open this, but I'm afraid Izzy would take out my eye with that picture frame. They went around and knocked on the front door. Izzy's mother opened it, frowning at them. Sonia strode to a wall hanging, lifted it up, and fumbled for the controls. The door appeared. That hanging was there when I moved in, Izzy's mother cried. I never looked behind it. Vanti snorted. Then you might want to check behind that bookshelf. She winked at Izzy as they left. Back in the bot closet, O'Neill turned to the women. Now what? We know TDC took 4 doses of lethal nanobots. Then she came up here and disappeared through this bot duct. She could be anywhere in the station. The facial recognition program hasn't gotten any hits. She said she was going to use those doses and then disappear. The SEC team hasn't found any more useful evidence in Tab and Salon. We don't know who she is or what she wants. We don't even know if she was connected to the chair's death. Does that pretty much sum it all up? Thanks, Grizz. That was so helpful. Vanti paced the tiny room. Why don't we focus on what we do know? And what would that be? He yanked the lift panel out from behind the bot and fitted it into place in the ladder shaft. Turning, he reached out a hand to Sonia to help her on. She gave him a grateful nod and stepped up. Vanti rolled her eyes and leapt lightly onto the platform. He followed. As they started down the shaft, Vanti listed items on her fingers. We know there are 4 more targets. These could be board members or someone else. We know the person behind this, or at least one of them, is a woman. Hang on, O'Neill interrupted. How do we know it's a woman? She looked female, but that can be faked. All we really have to go on is height and build. That can narrow down our field a little, but not much. He sighed. Fine. We're looking for an apparently female woman, approximately 177 centimeters and 70 to 80 kilograms in mass. We have a voice print, which SecTech can run through an all-channel comparison. Forensics probably got some DNA at the salon. I'm going to recommend additional security on all board members and voice checks at all ports before passengers are allowed to embark. O'Neill stared at his partner. Wow. That's way more than I thought we had. He turned to the other woman. What do you think, Sonia? The older woman started. I'm not sure. Nothing is working out as I expected. I guess we'll keep trying. Vanti's ideas are better than anything I can come up with. They rode the rest of the way down in silence. In the bot closet, O'Neill put the lift panel away, then opened the door for Sonia. We'll see you later, Sonia. No! Sonia stopped dead in the doorway. "You must come back to the Happy Pole with me. If you don't, someone will suspect there was another exit from my compartment." "I kind of assumed there was," Vanti said. "I mean, you don't really think people believe you spend all day and night in that tiny room behind the restaurant, do you?" "They do believe it. That's one of the keys to the Chesna mystery. She runs the lower half of the station from the back of the restaurant." "Whatever," O'Neill said. "I just want to get moving on these leads." When they reached the synthwood door, O'Neill held it open for the two women. Sonia climbed into the throne, spreading the blanket over her lap. She reactivated the PVD and gestured toward the two stools. Vanti sat on one, but O'Neill stood next to the throne. "Aren't you going to sit down?" Sonia asked, reaching toward her control panel. "For what? That gentle ride? I'll stand." As the platform started turning, he lurched against Vanti, then grabbed the throne for balance. "Sorry about that. Maybe I'd better sit." The Chesna shook her head. "Men." They bid the Chesna farewell and strode back out into the corridors. "Okay, what was that all about?" Vanti demanded. "What?" O'Neill feigned innocence. "Not sitting down on the turntable? Was it that obvious?" O'Neill grinned. "Yes." She drew the word out, then narrowed her eyes. "You made it obvious. On purpose. Why?" "I want them to find the bug I placed on the throne." He stepped into the float tube and dropped out of sight. Vanti followed. "Classic misdirection,"
Vanti said as she stepped out and joined him on the Level 3 concourse.
"You planted another one somewhere else. If they find the obvious one, maybe they won't look for the second," he confirmed. They grabbed takeout in the concourse, then hurried back to their compartment. "Here's the audio from the bug on the throne." He flipped the sound icon up, and a background noise from the restaurant hummed through the speaker. "Here's the bug patch I placed on Sonia's arm when I helped her up onto the float panel." Vanti flipped up another icon. "And here's the one I put on her neck when we were looking for the access panel in compartment 26, and the one on her boot, and the one under my stool at the restaurant." She flicked up two more icons. "A bit of overkill, don't you think?" O'Neill opened the thermal pack and handed a steaming bowl of noodles to Vanti. "Didn't realize you were setting some, too," she replied, getting utensils out of a drawer. "Fork or chopsticks?" "Fork," O'Neill answered. "I still can't manage those things. Do your bug patches have locators on them?" "Of course." She pulled up another screen and threw it over the audio icons. The station schematic opened, and all 5 icons stacked atop one another in the compartment labeled Happy Pole. Either they haven't noticed any of them, or Sonia hasn't moved. By the time they'd finished dinner, the bugs on the throne and the stool had been located and disabled. Just before the second disappeared from their hollow, a deep voice growled. "No one spies on the Sprejai. You're lucky the Chesna likes you." "You're a good boy, Jan." The Chesna's voice rang through the speakers. "I must rest now." The trackers rotated on the dais, and then all 3 moved through the door. "Where do you think she's going?" O'Neill said, getting up to order some dessert through the auto kitchen. "I don't know. She was shaken by something in that compartment. Did you notice how she went from focused and helpful to vague and helpless?" Vanti chased the last chicken fragment around her bowl with the chopsticks. O'Neill thought back. She'd been holding that discarded coverall. "SecTech must have cleared that compartment, right?" He pulled open the report. They'd done standard recordings and scans. When they were done, everything in that room could be recreated in the SecTech hollow stage. Well, everything except the hidden door. How is it that we don't know anything about these PVDs? Vanti rubbed a hand over her face. I was wondering that too. We're supposed to have the best tech out there. Maybe it's classified? She opened a database and typed in a query. Nothing. Could it have been invented by the Sprejai? Do they have an R&D department? He stuck a spoon into his chocolate pudding. That smells really good, Vanti said, her eyebrows drawn down in surprise. You can't have any. O'Neill pulled the bowl close. It's auto-kitchen food, and you don't eat that. Oh, come on, let me try it. Then you can say, I told you so. Just one bite. She smiled winningly. Fine, but get your own spoon. He turned back to the data and tried another query. Look at this. There is a record of similar-sounding research. It was done here on station and eventually abandoned for lack of results. Guess who the researcher was? Vanti leaned in close, peering over his shoulder. Her spoon fell to the table. Marcella Krasuski-Kolakowski. What do you want to bet that's Sonia's sister? And that her research wasn't a dead end, but rather co-opted for the Sprezhai. She clinked her spoon against his in triumph, and they both dug into the pudding. Blah! Vanti jumped out of her seat and lunged to the sink. She stuck her head under the faucet and poured water over her tongue. O'Neill dove for the bathroom, spitting into the toilet, then swishing cup after cup of water in his mouth. What was that? Vanti finally turned off the water and swiped at her wet shirt with a towel. O'Neill shrugged and spit out a mouthful of super mint freshener. It was supposed to be chocolate pudding. I guess maybe you have a point about cheap auto kitchen food. She dumped the pudding bowl into the auto kitchen and hit recycle. So that explains Sonia's sudden change in attitude. Once she saw that PVD in compartment 26, she realized Marcella, or someone else in the Sprezhai, must be involved. I'm kind of surprised she showed it to us at all. Where is she now? They looked at the holo. The 3 audio icons showed Sonia in Cargo Bay H. What do you suppose she's doing there? O'Neill pulled on station shoes and grabbed his tool pack. I'll bet she's meeting Marcella. Vanti slung a sleek belt around her hips and checked the hidden pockets. Then she grabbed her trank gun, perfect for the confined spaces on station. You've got the audio routed to your audio implant? Of course, O'Neill replied with a tinge of disgust. Really, you'd think he was a cadet on his first mission and Vanti a seasoned veteran. I aced the same training sims you did, he reminded her. With all this talk of betting, you're starting to sound like Sonia and her dog races. 7. They jogged up the corridor and out onto the concourse. Heavy crowds clogged the open spaces. A concert was scheduled to start in 20 minutes. Vanti and O'Neill pushed, squirmed, and threatened their way to the float tubes, then bounced up to level 36. While passengers boarded interstellar cruisers through the scenic greenhouses on level 40, walking along plasglass walled access bridges, cargo and crew accessed the ships via the warehouses on levels 36 and 37. Windowless cargo tubes slanted up to deliver consumables, cargo, and relief crew to the lower levels of the ships. The cargo levels were off limits to most station personnel, but Vanti and O'Neill's SEC agent IDs granted them access. They didn't bother to wonder how Sonia got in. She obviously had run of the station. The float tubes dumped them out in a caged area about 9 meters square. O'Neill triggered the gate lock. Should we call for backup? Vanti asked as they weaved through the massive stacks of cargo. Loader bots whizzed by, bearing crates, totes, and pallets of shrink-wrapped goods. She pointed out the thick yellow lines on the ground. I think we need to stay between these. Another bot zipped by, bare centimeters outside the yellow line, reinforcing her point. I want to know what's going on first, O'Neill answered, pointing at a sign that read Bays H-I-J with a bright arrow beneath. Sonia trusted us, so let's give her the benefit of the doubt. They followed the signs for Bay H, staying between the lines which protected them from the speeding bots. Their path ended with a red slash across the walkway. A bright red, flashing, holographic stop sign popped up before them. After a few seconds, the sign turned green, and a voice told them to proceed. The second they crossed a matching red line, bots began whizzing past behind them. Traffic decreased as they approached Bay H. I've gotten access to the station schedules, Vanti said, as they jogged along between the yellow lines. There's no ship in Bay H. What are you doing?
a familiar voice demanded. Vanti and O'Neill stopped dead in their tracks, looking wildly around the warehouse. The workaholic bots skittered on, but no one else was visible.
"I'm doing what needs to be done," replied an eerily similar voice.
Vanti tapped her ear and whispered,
"Sonia."
Of course. The audio links were live, and someone else must have joined the Chesna. O'Neill's audio implant pinged with Vanti's ringtone. "It looks like they're in the main cargo bay." Vanti's voice echoed weirdly both through the air and in his implant. "You go in through the control booth, and I'll go through the crew access. There's a hatch to the main bay." "Roger." O'Neill ran to the control booth door and tapped in his SEC authorization. After a brief second, the door cycled open. The booth was a long, narrow room with windows along one side looking out into the cargo bay. A control panel with several workstations ran the length of the room, so human cargo masters could monitor and direct loading. At the far end, a door led into the cargo bay.
"What do you mean by that?" Sonia demanded. "Those top lips will suck us dry," the other woman said. "They rob us of our livelihood and treat us as slaves."
O'Neill ducked low and ran to the far end of the room. The door whispered open at his command, and he stepped into the huge, cold space. "You'll get no argument from me," Sonia replied.
"But that's no justification for murder."
O'Neill, shielded by a huge cargo lifter, risked a look out into the bay. Sonia and a woman who looked enough like her to be her twin stood in the center of the empty space. Marcella looked nothing like the woman who had killed Tabin, though. Were there others involved?
"How can we break free if not by force?" She paced back and forth, her gestures wild and forceful. "They are strangling us. Even the Sprezhai is crippled by their grip." "Murder is not our way," Sonia cried. "We, the Sprezhai, have other means at our disposal."
"Right." The woman turned on Sonia with a harsh laugh.
"Like you would dare to make a board member disappear. They would crush us all before we got him off station. That's why Smith had to be eliminated." "Who are the other 4 targets?" Sonia asked. "Why only 4? Who told you there were 4 more targets?" Marcella demanded. "There was a witness at Tabin's salon."
Sonia shook her head slowly, as if disappointed in her sister.
"You were too careless. I'm sure you can eliminate that witness for me." "So it was you. How did you change your appearance so much?"
Sonia grabbed Marcella's arm. Marcella smiled.
"The PVD is much more flexible than you know. I've made a few improvements."
O'Neill straightened up. "Vanti, move in. She's said enough, and she's clearly working alone."
"Have you administered the other 4 doses yet?"
Sonia asked, but Marcella heard something and spun toward O'Neill. With a shriek, she whipped a blaster out of her cloak and fired. The cargo lifter beside him shuddered and collapsed in a molten puddle. O'Neill dodged across the room, weaving and bobbing. Marcella's blasts scorched the air in the bay. O'Neill yanked out his own blaster. With another shriek, she turned and ran. Sonia raced after her sister.
"Wait! Marcella, we can figure this out together!"
"Vanti, I'm taking fire. Where are you?" O'Neill demanded. "I'm stuck in the freaking cargo airlock. The internal door won't open, and the crew access I came in through is jammed. They're headed your way." He pounded across the cargo bay, the 2 women several meters ahead. "Sonia, Marcella, there's nowhere to go." Marcella reached the cargo airlock, a huge door taking up most of the external wall. Generally, cargo was pushed into the airlock, which could be disconnected from the station's artificial gravity. Then bots moved the cargo through the lift tubes into the ships locked onto the station. For large loads, the outer airlock doors could be opened so station tugs could pull the cargo out to long-haul shifters that were too large to dock at the station. Marcella looked through the plasglass portal into the airlock and turned, baring her teeth.
"Don't come any closer. I'll blow the outer lock, and your partner will be space dust."
Sonia stopped, steps from her sister.
"She knows how to do it."
she said quietly. She works here in cargo. She turned to the other woman. You don't want to do this. There's no reason for you to kill again. Whose side are you on, Sonia? Marcella demanded. Would you choose these security agents over your own flesh and blood? Your own siostra? You know the Sprezhai always comes first. I would never put outsiders before family. Sonia took a step toward her sister. Marcella put her hand over the control panel. Don't! Vanti's white face peered through the plasglass, tight and wide-eyed. Trank her! Her voice was loud and clear in O'Neill's ear. I can't, he muttered. You have the trank. I brought the blaster. And if I fire it that close to the cargo door, it could cause a serious breach. I'll see if I can move around to get a clear shot. Marcella, please. Step away from the control panel. Sonia took another step toward her sister. You don't want to hurt anyone. We can make this all go away. Just trust me. Sonia gestured toward O'Neill. Vanti's eyes narrowed. What is going on out there? It sounds like Sonia is planning to make you and me disappear. Take the shot. No! Marcella put her fingers on the control panel. You can't fool me with your doublespeak. I taught you to do that. It's what makes us such good chestnuts. You are going to help those agents. No, I told you I'd never put them over Sprezhai. Sonia reached out. Marcella's hands began shaking. But you turned me over to the station to save the Sprezhai. She spit the words at her sister. Isn't that what you've taught me? To put the Sprezhai first, to do whatever it takes to keep the Sprezhai secure. Your actions are endangering all of us. When are you going to put the Sprezhai first? How dare you? Everything I do is for the Sprezhai. The board is choking all of us. The Sprezhai won't survive if we don't break free. This... She pulled something out of her pocket. Is the key to survival. Sonia leaped forward, clawing at the vial in Marcella's hand. O'Neill sprinted toward the struggling women. Sonia shrieked. Marcella cried out. They broke apart, and O'Neill grabbed Marcella's arm. Sonia looked down at her arm, then up at her sister. You've killed me! No!
Marcella's face crumpled, and she reached out to the younger woman.
I didn't kill you. I didn't mean to inject you. You shouldn't have tried to take that away from me. It's not my fault. How long? Sonia sat down against the cargo door. O'Neill cuffed Marcella. How long till what? Sonia gestured to her arm. Until I'm dead. Would someone get me out of here? Vanti hammered on the plasglass. We have a little situation out here. O'Neill growled. You're fine in there. It's getting a little tight in here, she said, her voice choked. Tight? That airlock is huge. Are you claustrophobic? O'Neill turned away from the door. You aren't going to die, Marcella said. I'd have to activate the nanobots. I would never do that to you. Tears rolled down her face, and she pulled away from O'Neill to slide down the wall next to her sibling. So, I just live the rest of my life with this bomb inside me? You think that's okay? Get me out of this airlock! Vanti pounded harder on the plasglass. O'Neill rubbed his forehead. Their voices pounded through his head. He turned on them. Sonia, we'll talk to an esthetician. Someone must know how to unprogram these things. He turned a little. Marcella, you are going to a cell on level 1. Vanti, he glared through the plasglass. I'm calling maintenance, so chill out. All three women looked at him for a second, then resumed their complaints, louder. O'Neill rubbed his temples, praying for quiet. 8. Vanti rolled up the hammock, stuffing it into a sack. She tossed it to O'Neill. You might need this in your fancy compartment up on 27. You probably can't afford furniture. You're one to talk about affording things. Maybe you should keep this. The Dirtside pay scale is so low you'll be lucky to afford an empty box. He tossed the bag back to her. Are you sure you won't stay? My life flashed before my eyes when I was stuck in that airlock. Repeatedly. All she had to do was push that button, and I'd have been sucked out into the void. There are a lot of risks to being a sec agent, but asphyxiation in outer space doesn't have to be one of them. She tossed the hammock back. O'Neill pushed the stretch-tight skin suits in with the hammock. This is all going to security supply, he said with a wide smile. With my promotion, I can afford some pretty nice furniture. Thank you very much. I can't believe Don Saeed offered you a job in board security. I was the brains of this operation. She crammed the last of her personal belongings into a small tote bag. He offered it to you first. You said no. Yeah, I know. Vanti dropped her tote on the dusty futon. Well, I guess this is it then. After 4 years of academy together and one crazy assignment, we go our separate ways. I think I might actually miss you, Grizz. Thanks, Vanti. I'll miss you too. O'Neill picked up her bag. Come on. I'll walk you to the shuttle dock. Vanti grabbed the bag and walked to the door. No, it's better this way. I'll see you around, Grizz, and whatever you do, don't eat the pudding. And she was gone. This has been Orbital Operations, a Space Janitor prequel, written by Julia Huney, narrated by Rachel Music. Copyright 2019 by Julia Huney. Production copyright by Julia Huney. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Julia Huney. Thanks for listening to Orbital Operations. I hope you really enjoyed it. Rachel did such a fantastic job with the narration. If you'd like to read more of my books, you can find me online at juliahuney.com. I'll put a link in the comments so you can find me. You can also get a free ebook there, another prequel to my Space Janitor series, and a couple of other short stories that I've posted. I'll continue putting books here on YouTube so that you can listen for free, and if you want to buy copies of those, they're available from my PayHip store or from Audible or Kobo or any of the other big audio retailers. Thanks.